no way back for Harry. He is done. As far as the royal family are concerned, his goose is cooked. He's out. Baby, it's over. And the Duke, we're told, is consumed with regret following the horrible life choices that he's made since he married Meghan Markle. He doesn't even realise yet, in my view, that he has been the victim of a con trick, that he has been subjected to a fraud by Meghan. And when he finally wakes up and realises it, and I don't know when that's going to be, he's going to be the angriest man in the world. At the moment, he's the least happy millionaire. He despises his brother, and they are no longer brothers.
Prince Harry is consumed with regret over the life choices that have left him estranged from his homeland, his family, and the role he most enjoyed in life, which was being a royal prince. The framing comes from Raf Heidel-Mankoo, the historian and broadcaster who has placed the assessment on the public record through GB News. Heidel-Mankoo's operational standing is consequential because his analytical framework on British constitutional and royal questions operates at the level of substantive expertise rather than at the level of celebrity commentary. He understands the institutional traditions, the constitutional architecture, and the personal and family dynamics that have shaped the senior royal figures across generations. His framing on Harry's current operational position is therefore not the speculation of an outside observer. It is the structural assessment of a figure whose professional standing allows him to read the documentary signals accurately and to place that reading on the public record without operational consequences for his continued access. This is the central operational reading of the Mark Dolan show this week, and the broadcast develops the analytical framework that places Heidel-Mankoo's assessment within the broader documentary record of Harry's contracting commercial and institutional positioning.
Now, speaking to GB News, Rafe said, I think it's quite clear that Prince Harry has many, many regrets about the life choices that have ended up with him being estranged from his homeland and from his family and from the role that he most enjoyed, being a royal prince.
The structural feature Heidel-Mankoo identifies is that Harry's underlying identity was the institutional one. He lived for the parades. He lived for Buckingham Palace, Sandringham, Balmoral, and Clarence House. He lived for the prince title and for the operational duty the title carried. The Megxit departure terminated the operational basis of this identity. Harry can retain the prince title in name. He cannot, while operating from Montecito and through the Sussex commercial pipeline, retain the operational substance of the role the title presupposes. The structural meaning is that the loss is identity level rather than purely positional. The figure Harry was before Megxit was the figure he wanted to be.
And he knows that Harry lived for being a frontline serving royal. He lived for the parades. He lived for Buckingham Palace and Sandringham and Balmoral and Clarence House. He lived for the prince in his title. He, of course, was and is the son of Diana and Charles. He was born into this. It's his birthright. It's his passion.
The figure he has become after Megxit is operationally not the figure he wanted to be. The regret Heidel-Mankoo identifies operates at this level. The Dolan analytical counterpoint that the broadcast develops is consequential because it raises the operational question of whether Harry is, in Dolan's framing, a narcissist of comparable register to Meghan rather than the institutional victim the Heidel-Mankoo framing implies. Dolan's structural argument is that Harry's pre-Megxit public persona of being a regular guy who likes a beer operated as the cover for an underlying ego that has produced operational decisions consistent with substantial narcissistic disposition. The Spare memoir, the Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, and the broader 6-year commercial pipeline of extraction from family material are, in this reading, not the operational expressions of a victim figure, but the operational expressions of a narcissist whose public framing has been calibrated to obscure the underlying disposition.
So we know that she's an egomaniac. The problem with Harry is that he pretends to be this regular guy that likes a beer, just one of the guys. But in fact, he's a narcissist and has a massive ego. And that's why Rafe Hadel Manku is absolutely right to point out that the role he most enjoyed was being a royal prince, a role that has been taken away from him as a result of his decision to marry Meghan Markle.
The structural feature Dolan identifies is that the public's tendency to read Harry sympathetically derives from the success of the cover, not from accurate observation of the underlying. The structural risk of this reading is that it removes the institutional victim framing that has operated as the protective scaffolding around Harry's public reception across the past 6 years. The Hadel Manku and Dolan framings can be operationally reconciled if both are read as describing different elements of the same configuration. The institutional identity that Hadel Manku identifies as Harry's underlying purpose is the structural framework within which Harry operated. The narcissistic disposition Dolan identifies is the personal character through which Harry operated within that framework.
Had absolutely no intention of remaining a frontline serving royal when she married Harry. Meghan had her own plan, which is to bag a royal prince, ship him off to America and start a new life as a private citizen and as a celebrity pair. Now, of course, we know that that project has gone horribly wrong.
The Megxit departure terminated the institutional framework, but did not terminate the personal character. The result is a figure whose personal disposition continues to require the operational satisfaction that the institutional framework previously provided, but who no longer has access to that framework. The narcissistic disposition therefore turns to the commercial pipeline as the substitute satisfaction mechanism. The substitute is operationally insufficient because the commercial pipeline does not produce the institutional substance that the underlying personality requires. The structural result is the regret and unhappiness that Hadel Manku's framing captures. The Charlotte Griffith sourcing that Dolan develops on the brothers' relationship is the additional structural detail worth presenting. Griffith, editor-at-large at the Mail on Sunday, has moved from being a journalist generally favourable to the Sussex household to becoming what Dolan characterises as one of the Sussex's most operationally effective critics.
Hinged interview on ITV News when he was in Ukraine. What was he doing in Ukraine? Why is he going to a war zone if he's so worried about his personal security?
I can't take my family to England, to a spot like here at the River Thames with the Shard just over there. I can't come into London, which is arguably the safest big city on the planet, but I can go to Ukraine, which is being bombed to smithereens by Vladimir Putin. Yeah, make it make sense. Yeah.
Her evidence in the High Court is likely to be operationally decisive in sinking Harry's continued legal action against the Daily Mail. Her current reporting includes the direct framing that William, in her terminology, effing hates his brother. Her additional framing is that William and Harry are, on her sourcing, no longer brothers in any operationally meaningful sense. The structural meaning of this framing is consequential because it operates at the family relational level rather than at the institutional position level. The Sandringham invitation withdrawal, the Coronation exclusion plan, and the Highgrove photograph removal are institutional decisions. The brothers no longer framing operates at the relational level beneath those institutional decisions, and it captures the operational endpoint at which the institutional separation has now. The Griffith South Africa fraud framing is the additional structural element worth presenting. Griffith has reported, sourced through her own networks, that Meghan, during the period when Megxit was being structured, was operationally pretending to be interested in properties in South Africa as the operational mechanism through which she humoured Harry's stated preference for a rural existence on a farm. The structural feature of this framing is that the South Africa option was not, on Meghan's underlying calculation, ever operationally available. The framework was theatre. Harry was operating under the framing that the household would build a rural life, raising cattle, milking goats, and collecting eggs. Meghan was operating under the framing that the household would establish itself in California as a commercial celebrity pair. The structural meaning is that the disjunction between the two operational frameworks was present at the Megxit planning stage, with the South Africa option deployed as the cover under which Meghan's actual operational plan was protected from Harry's awareness.
Major mental health issues. Right, the guy is not happy. He's so down. Have you seen that body language? He's just like a sack of spuds, isn't he? He goes around his day with his shoulders hunched, can't even break a smile. He's just miserable. So major mental health issues, which I think was not helped by his enjoyment, his indulgence in mind-altering substances back in the day.
I was like totally baked for a decade, yeah.
The structural reading Dolan develops is that Harry has been the operational subject of a sustained fraud by Meghan, and that when he eventually recognises this, he will be the angriest man in the world. The recognition on Dolan's framing has not yet operationally occurred at the level required to produce the marital exit, but the structural conditions for the recognition continue to develop. The Kyiv interview Heydel Manku and Dolan both reference is the structural illustration of how this configuration produces operationally chaotic public output. Harry travelled to Ukraine, a war zone being actively bombed by Russian forces, while simultaneously maintaining the public position that he cannot bring his family to the United Kingdom because of personal security concerns. The structural inconsistency is operationally obvious to any audience that examines the documentary record. The country Harry cannot safely visit is one of the operationally safest large cities in the world. The country Harry can safely visit is in the midst of active wartime hostilities. The framing the Sussex household has deployed to explain this inconsistency requires the audience to accept that the security calibration operates differently for political and cultural reasons that the audience cannot independently verify. The structural meaning is that the inconsistency itself becomes a public relations problem that the household must subsequently manage. The Kyiv interview that Harry delivered, in which he was filmed in what observers characterized as a burglar-like outfit, including a beanie hat and visible weight gain, did not address the underlying inconsistency. It produced additional documentary material that the audience could read against the broader Sussex framing. The Geneva World Health Organization conference Meghan attended this past week is the parallel structural illustration that the broadcast develops. The conference, hosted by WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus and other global health leaders, focused on online harms, including the psychological impact of social media on children.
Friend of the Sussexes, many of you believe a mouthpiece to, let me promise you, the arch nemesis. And the Sussexes detest Charlotte Griffiths now. Detest with a capital D. Why? Well, because she's calling them out for the horrible double standards, which we'll come to. I've got a massive, big news story for you.
Meghan flew to Geneva on a private jet to deliver remarks on the subject. Her remarks operated at the standard register of her Sussex commercial communications. The structural problem with her appearance at the conference is that she had, days earlier, posted a mirror selfie Instagram photograph featuring Princess Lilibet with the caption, "Mama's Little Helper." The structural inconsistency between the public framing of the household as concerned about online harms to children and the operational reality of the household using the children as Instagram content is operationally obvious to any audience examining both elements simultaneously. The audience response to Meghan's Geneva appearance was operationally weak. Passers-by who watched the video of her speech reportedly characterized it with the framing, "poor her." The structural meaning of this reception is that Meghan's commercial positioning as an authoritative voice on substantive policy questions has now reached the level at which audiences receive her public engagements with pity rather than with the operational respect the engagements are calibrated to produce. The Geneva conference, like the Australian tour, like the various pretend royal engagement formats the household has deployed, generates the visual register of institutional engagement without the substantive content that institutional engagement requires. Audiences can read the difference between the visual register and the substantive content. The reading produces the pity level reception that the Geneva passers-by expressed. The Hadel-Manku zinger that Dolan develops as the structural conclusion of the broader assessment is operationally direct. It is inconceivable that either the King or the Prince of Wales would ever open a door to Harry to return to the royal fold. The structural meaning of this framing is that the institutional pathway for reincorporation is now operationally closed at the senior figure level.
Harry, is that he doesn't even realise yet, in my view, that he has been the victim of a con trick, that he has been subjected to a fraud by Meghan. And when he finally wakes up and realises it, and I don't know when that's going to be, he's going to be the angriest man in the world. At the moment, he's the least happy millionaire on the planet. But he's going to be so mad.
Charles, who has, across his reign, extended some operational conciliation toward Harry through the Clarence House September 2024 meeting and through other limited engagements, has not extended an operational pathway for substantive reincorporation. William, whose institutional position has consolidated through the Sandringham invitation withdrawal and the parallel decisions, has structurally precluded the reincorporation pathway. The structural meaning is that the institutional firewall now operates at both the current reign and the next reign levels. The reincorporation that Hadel-Manku identifies as Harry's underlying preference is therefore operationally unavailable across the entire institutional timeline. The regret Harry is operationally consumed with is therefore not the regret of a temporary difficulty that future institutional decisions could resolve. It is the regret of a permanent operational outcome that the institutional architecture has structurally locked in.
But she told me that he despises his brother and they are no longer brothers. You heard me right. 2 quotes from one of the best connected royal journalists in the world. No longer brothers, and William detests Harry. I can't think of a worse verb than detests, and that's where we are.
The Dolan structural reading of the one pathway through which Harry could potentially recover institutional positioning is consequential. The pathway requires Harry to divorce Meghan, to return to England, to apologise comprehensively for the cumulative documented pattern, and to sign a legally binding contract committing him to never produce another commercial book, podcast, or television interview drawing on family material. The structural feature of this pathway is that it requires Harry to take actions that the Sussex household commercial pipeline would foreclose. Meghan's continued commercial position depends substantially on Harry's continued commercial output. The divorce would terminate the operational basis of the joint commercial pipeline. The contractual commitment to no future commercial output would terminate Harry's own ability to generate residual cash flow from family material. The pathway is therefore structurally available only if Harry is willing to surrender both the marital configuration and the residual commercial capacity that the configuration sustains. On the operational record of Harry's documented decisions across the past 6 years, the willingness to execute this surrender has not been demonstrated. The Hadel-Manku additional framing on Harry and Meghan's recognition of their commercial dependence on royal proximity is the further structural element worth presenting. Both Harry and Meghan have, on this reading, operationally recognised that their commercial prominence depends substantially on their proximity to the institutional royal family. The more removed they become from the royal world and royal engagements, the less commercial interest the broader audience extends to them as figures. The structural consequence is that the household is now making operationally visible efforts to style itself and to carry out activities as if it were still operating as working members of the royal family. The pretend royal tour format, the Kyiv Security Forum framing of doing what he was born to do, the one-off fashion marketplace deployment at Bondi Beach, and the broader pattern of pseudo-institutional activity are the operational expressions of this strategic recognition. The structural problem with this configuration is that the imitation does not produce the commercial value that the original institutional activity generated. Audiences can distinguish between substantive institutional engagement and its imitation. The imitation generates the visual register without the commercial substance. The Mama's Little Helper Instagram caption is the operational instance that the Dolan broadcast develops with particular emphasis. The structural feature of this caption is that it positions a 4-year-old child as an instrumental adjunct to the parent's commercial brand operation. The child is not the subject of the post. The child is the prop through which the parent's mama positioning is articulated.
Old Rafe goes on to say there's a world of difference between what Harry hopes will happen and what has any chance of happening. He said it's inconceivable. This is the zinger. And this will be devastating for Harry for the H-bomb. Rafe says it is inconceivable that either the King or the Prince of Wales, William, would ever open a door to Harry to return to the royal fold.
The structural problem with this configuration is that it converts the child's existence into a commercial asset of the parent's brand, rather than respecting the child's separate developmental trajectory. The original Sussex framing during the Megxit period was that the children would be protected from public exposure to allow them to develop as private individuals. The Mama's Little Helper caption contradicts this framing in the most direct operational register. The child is being publicly framed as the parent's commercial helper. The structural meaning is that the original protective framing has been completely abandoned in favor of the commercial monetization pattern that the household has built around the children. The Dolan structural framing on why this configuration is operationally damaging to the children is consequential. The Cambridge children, who are also operationally famous through institutional inheritance, have been managed by William and Catherine to allow them to operate as nearly ordinary upper-class British children. They attend school, they play sport, they engage with family activities. The parents control the photographic supply to the extent that the paparazzi market for unauthorized images has been substantially reduced.
That in 10, 15 years' time, Harry's divorced from Meghan, flat broke because she'll be using Californian lawyers, estranged from the royal family and just living in exile on his own in an apartment in LA or something. And then he really can be a bum. Then he really can be a homeless man, dressed like a burglar in his beanie.
The structural meaning is that the institutional approach to managing famous children is to minimize rather than maximize their public exposure. The Sussex approach does the opposite. The children are featured constantly across Instagram, in Netflix productions, in commercial activities, and in the broader Sussex public relations operation. The structural cost of this configuration will be borne by the children across the duration of their development in ways that are operationally difficult to anticipate, but that the parents' choice has rendered structurally inevitable. The Elton John parallel that Dolan develops is the structural illustration of how famous parents have successfully managed their children's exposure across multiple generations.
So Meghan shared a mirror selfie on Instagram featuring herself standing in front of a mirror in her walk-in closet. Now, I've got no problem with that. Meghan is a celebrity, okay? I got no problem whatsoever with her making a living and having an Instagram and posting selfies. That is what celebrities do. I do it.
Elton John's 2 children are operationally famous through their father's celebrity status. The famous status is not, however, operationally amplified through public exposure decisions by the parents. The children appear in occasional fleeting photographs, do not participate in the father's brand operation, and operate substantially outside the commercial framework that the father's celebrity occupies. The structural meaning is that famous parenthood does not require the children to be deployed as commercial assets. The deployment is a choice. The choice the Sussex household has made is operationally different from the choice Elton John has made. And the difference reflects the underlying commercial pressure the Sussex household is operating under, rather than any underlying parenting philosophy. The Princess Anne parallel that Dolan develops is the structural illustration of how institutional families have managed similar configurations. Princess Anne, when she had her children Peter and Zara, declined to extend the Prince and Princess titles to them, with the operational purpose of allowing them to develop as substantially normal individuals despite their institutional inheritance. The decision was operationally controversial at the time, but has been validated by the subsequent trajectory of Peter and Zara's lives. Both have operated as substantially functional adults with their own careers and family configurations, without the operational difficulties that have affected other royal grandchildren who retained the institutional titles. The structural meaning is that the institutional family has institutional knowledge about how to manage these configurations to produce successful outcomes. The Sussex household has access to this knowledge through Harry's institutional formation. The household has chosen not to apply the knowledge. The choice is the operational expression of the underlying commercial pressure that the household's strategic position now operates under. The Hadel-Mankoo structural framing on the commercial value calibration is the additional element worth presenting. The Sussex household's commercial value on his framing derives from how royal the public perceives them to be. The structural problem is that the royalness washes away as the household departs from the institutional configuration. Harry's speaking fees have contracted from approximately $1 million per appearance during the early Megxit period to approximately $50,000 now. The contraction reflects the structural feature that the commercial market for Harry's appearances was operating at the level the institutional brand commanded, not at the level his personal brand commands. As the institutional brand has been operationally deconstructed by the household's own choices, the commercial value has contracted in parallel. The structural meaning is that the household has been monetizing an asset that depreciates through use. Each commercial deployment of the institutional connection reduces the institutional connection's subsequent commercial value. The cumulative effect is the contraction the documentary record now shows. The closing observation is that the Hadel-Mankoo framing on Harry's regret, the Dolan framing on Harry's narcissism, the Geneva Conference pity reception, the Mama's Little Helper Instagram caption, the Elton John and Princess Anne parallels, and the commercial value contraction are facets of the same broader structural configuration. The Sussex household is operating against an asset base that depreciates through use, with operational decisions that systematically accelerate the depreciation. The household is producing children-focused commercial content while publicly speaking about online harms to children. The household is delivering pretend royal engagements while operationally being unable to access the institutional infrastructure that real royal engagements depend on. Harry is publicly framing himself as a working royal, doing what he was born to do, while the institutional family has structurally separated from his configuration through the Sandringham invitation withdrawal, the coronation exclusion plan, the Highgrove photograph removal, and the broader operational responses that the documented Sussex pattern has produced. The audience reads the cumulative pattern accurately. The institutional response has consolidated, the commercial pipeline continues to contract, the cumulative documentary record continues to expand, the mathematics continue to work through the household's documented financial trajectory. Harry's identity, which Hadel-Mankoo identifies as the underlying loss, cannot be operationally recovered through the commercial pipeline that has been built as the substitute. The substitute is structurally inadequate to the underlying requirement. The regret Hadel-Mankoo identifies will continue to deepen across the timeline that the financial structure provides. The verdict is in. The mathematics will continue to work through, the audience will continue to observe the pattern, the institutional architecture will continue to operate at the level the next reign will require. The Sussex contribution to the same news cycle will continue to operate as the operational illustration of what the alternative configuration produces in the longer term.